Silence is one of Martin Scorsese's best films and is a masterpiece that I absolutely love. After seeing it for a second time recently, I just knew that I had to talk about it. I wrote some notes on it, but I don't really know where to start, so let's just begin. If talking in terms of plot, two Catholic missionaries, Rodriguez, played by Andrew Garfield, and Garipe, played by Adam Driver, travel to Japan in search of their missing mentor, Father Ferreira, played by Liam Neeson, because they suspect that he gave up his faith in Jesus Christ and intend to save his soul. The characters in Silence have clear beliefs and a want. Father Rodriguez and Garipe have a want of finding their mentor and set out on a journey to Japan in service of achieving this want, and they have clear beliefs in believing in the power of Jesus Christ. They encounter a small group of Chinese Christians and learn that their autocratic government has been finding Christians and have been trying to force them to give up their faith, and the priests try to help the Christians in any way they can. Now, the way the Japanese officials force the Christians to give up their faith is by telling them to trample on a metal plaque containing an image of Jesus Christ and spitting on a cross. These harsh ways only get harsher and more brutal as the film progresses. When the Christians approach the two priests regarding this, Rodriguez suggests that they trample, meanwhile Garipe is of the opposite belief. Every step in the screenplay serves to challenge our protagonist Rodriguez. He strongly believes in the power of God, but the extreme suffering he witnesses forces him to question his beliefs. When three Japanese Christians refuse to spit, they are tied to a cross and have to face the wrath of the high tide. For days, they stay there believing in God and suffer. Meanwhile, Rodriguez and Garipe are forced to helplessly watch from the sidelines. All of this unending cruelty leads Rodriguez to question why justice isn't being served. Why do innocent people have to suffer such brutality? The title Silence refers to the silence of God throughout the film. Why is God silent? Why isn't he helping these people and letting them suffer? These are questions that our protagonist often asks himself that can conjure endless debate. Does God exist? If yes, why does evil still exist? Why do good people have to pay the price? How powerful is the power of God? Many of the Japanese Christians would rather die than to give up their faith because they believe that there's a paradise waiting for them in the afterlife, and to die with pride is a noble death. The film also has a very minimalist score, adding to the theme of silence, which I think is a genius move. This movie is beautiful to look at. The cinematography is outstanding, and the choice of colors emphasize the dirty and grungy look of Japan in this era. The way the shots are composed, such as two hands embracing each other, serve to highlight the strong faith of the Christians, or a shot of a face to show the powerlessness of suffering. Fire, present within the diegetic universe of the film, is often the source of light and night, which makes for some gorgeous looking imagery with shadows in proper contrast. Every shot and camera movement has purpose and intention. The craft is meticulous and helps us feel the emotion of the characters from an extremely subjective perspective. Now, the entire film is about a protagonist who holds certain beliefs, and throughout the film, his beliefs are tested through the forces of antagonism with opposing beliefs, forcing our protagonist to make an internal change. So, of course, the character we're supposed to empathize with is our protagonist, Rodriguez, and he's easy to root for because all he's doing is helping innocent people. But Rodriguez is extremely flawed himself. He doesn't see himself as different from Jesus Christ himself. This isn't explicitly told to us through exposition, but it is implied. When Rodriguez looks at his reflection in the mirror, for a temporary moment he sees the face of Jesus. But Rodriguez isn't Jesus. His position as a priest causes him to slightly look down upon the miserable. He doesn't view them as equals but as people beneath him, and he feels like he's being noble when he allows them to confess their sins. This is explored through the character of Kichijiro. At first he's shown to us as a drunkard, but later we learn that he had witnessed his entire family burn alive in front of him simply because they did not give up their faith, whereas he did. And since Kichijiro did, Rodriguez views him as a wretch. But Kichijiro too has suffered and has repeatedly made mistakes. Rodriguez says that Jesus didn't just die for the noble, but he also died for the miserable and the corrupt. But Jesus did that viewing himself as an equal to everyone. But Rodriguez doesn't really see that. He believes that dying for the miserable makes him superior, but that's not what Jesus stood for. He's also ignorant towards the Buddhists. He considers his religion to be far superior because Buddha was a mortal, making him no different than the humans. All this serves to show that Rodriguez isn't perfect, and these flaws that could make him unlikable make him even more of a three-dimensional person whose conflict we can engage with. Kichijiro also serves another purpose, which I think is about confession. Throughout the film, he commits a sin and then seeks forgiveness for it. This repeated cycle made me question what is even the point of a confession if the sinner is just going to continue his way. Is it really a method of self improvement or just empty words? I applaud the film for making me ask such bold questions through the use of its brilliant storytelling. Now, if we go back to Rodriguez, he's always suffering, but it's indirect. He isn't directly being asked to trample on the image of Jesus. He's always forced to watch from the sidelines, which is horrifying enough, but it's nothing like being killed by the murderous tide, or beheaded, or forced to be tied upside down with your head onto the ground. Yes, these are the ways the Christians are made to suffer. And it's painful to witness, let alone imagine yourself in their situation. It's not at all easy to watch. Later on, when Rodriguez is captured by the Japanese officials, he's made to be locked inside a cage and watch people go through trials and tribulations. And when we see this, we know that this is from Rodriguez's perspective because we still see the bars not so prominently shown in the sides of the frame. But this subjective shot composition also helps us feel helpless like Rodriguez when he sees his fellow people get killed in merciless ways right in front of him and he can't do anything about it. The conflict only escalates as every trial leads Rodriguez to be more helpless as his faith in God becomes nothing but thinner. His will in God is tested repeatedly and it gets much more bleak. Rodriguez thinks that the Japanese see him as a foreigner who brought nothing but trouble to them, and that's an understandable thought that made me feel empathy for him. Rodriguez has suffered a lot. He has to witness his friend Garupe die in an attempt to save the Christians. This man has been broken to his limits, and as we enter the final act, Rodriguez finally achieves his goal. He meets his former mentor Father Ferreira, but it did not go the way he expected. His fear had come to pass as Father Ferreira truly had given up his faith, but it's for morally understandable reasons. It was so that he could end the suffering of his fellow Christians. Rodriguez is obviously against this and sees him as a disgrace, but I think he works to challenge Rodriguez's beliefs. He knows Rodriguez's flaws and points them out to him. He forces Rodriguez to ask the question, what would Jesus do? In the climax of the film, Rodriguez now goes through the trial himself. But this time it's not to save himself, it's to save the lives of the Christians who hang upside down. There's an immense sense of responsibility he feels at this moment because he's being asked to give up the one thing he has believed all his life. But in order to be like Jesus, we mustn't die with our pride, but be strong enough to sacrifice it for the greater good. And Rodriguez realizes this when Jesus finally speaks to him, and Jesus allows him to trample on the plaque. But he wasn't silent, he suffered with the innocent. Is this really Jesus, or is this part of Rodriguez's imagination? It doesn't matter, and after heavy contemplation, Rodriguez apostatizes and gives up his faith. And the scene is in slow motion to really emphasize that this is an important event in the film, because this is when the protagonist has his moment of change. This is when he finally overcomes his flaw and comes down to the level of the people who he thought were beneath him. Rodriguez then lives with the Japanese and helps them find out the identities of other Christians along with Ferreira, but he's not happy doing this. There's a lingering sense of guilt he feels for his actions. This is eminent when Kichijiro calls him Padre, meaning father, and Rodriguez is scared of being called that title because he doesn't feel worthy of it since he had apostatized. In the end, Rodriguez dies an old man in Japan and is given a Buddhist funeral, and in the final shot we see him holding a cross, showing how he never really gave up on his faith, that deep down he still believes in God, only this time he had changed for the better. Silence is a masterpiece that forced me to really think and ask difficult and challenging questions. It's most certainly not a film for everyone, as its subject matter can turn off a lot of people. It also isn't a fast-paced film. The story and shots linger and aren't afraid to be slow, but I think it's perfectly suitable for this kind of picture. Its themes and filmmaking are executed perfectly, and you can tell that this film is clearly personal to Scorsese, and that passion flows through every frame and dialogue. This is a film that I will continue to revisit, think about, and learn from over the coming years. Thank you for watching.